The first bullet whizzed past Sarah Dawson's ear as she dove behind the old water trough, her heart pounding like a runaway locomotive. The year was 1876, and the small town of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory was supposed to be her fresh start, not her final resting place. "Hand over the strong box, Missy," a gruff voice called out. "We know you're carrying the payroll for the Silver Sage mine." Sarah clutched the leather satchel tighter to her chest, her knuckles white with determination. At 22, she'd already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 16, and now working as the mine owner's trusted assistant, she wasn't about to surrender the wages that would feed 50 families without a fight. The second bullet splintered wood inches from her face, sending sharp fragments flying. 3 masked men had ambushed her just outside of town as she returned from the bank. They'd chased her back toward Copper Creek's main street, but at this early hour the town slept soundly, unaware of her predicament. "I count to 3, then we start shooting for real," the outlaw leader shouted. 1! Sarah's mind raced. The mine office was still 2 buildings away. 2! She closed her eyes, desperately praying for a miracle. That's far enough, gentlemen." The voice cut through the tension like a knife, deep, steady, and carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Sarah peered over the trough to see a tall figure standing in the middle of the street. His stance was relaxed but purposeful, the morning sun glinting off the silver star pinned to his vest. At his hip, a holstered Colt remained untouched, yet his presence alone seemed to freeze the outlaws in their tracks. "Well, if it ain't Marshal Owen Tucker," the lead outlaw sneered, turning his gun toward the newcomer. "This ain't your concern." "When you threaten innocent folks in my town, it becomes my concern," Marshal Tucker replied, taking a step forward. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each deliberate movement. "Now, lower those weapons before somebody gets hurt." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the outlaws shifted their positions, now aiming directly at the marshal. She'd seen him around town since her arrival 3 months ago, but had never exchanged more than a polite greeting. Now, this man she barely knew was standing between her and certain death. "The lady has something we want," the outlaw to the left growled. "Step aside, Marshal, unless you're aiming to die today." The marshal didn't flinch. "Then they'll have to shoot through me." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at his words. The marshal continued to advance slowly, placing himself directly between her and the bandits. She noticed his right hand was now hovering near his holster, but his expression remained calm, almost serene. 3 against 1, Marshal," the leader taunted. "Those odds don't favor you none." "Maybe not," Marshal Tucker conceded with a slight nod, "but the first man to pull that trigger won't live long enough to see who wins." His voice carried the certainty of a man who'd made similar promises before, and had kept them. The standoff stretched for what felt like eternity, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, the lead outlaw lowered his gun an inch. "This ain't over, Marshal," he hissed, "not by a long shot." "It is for today," Marshal Tucker replied evenly. "Now ride out while you still can." The outlaws exchanged glances before backing toward their horses, keeping their weapons trained on the marshal until the last possible moment. With a final threatening glare, they mounted and galloped away, disappearing in a cloud of dust. Only when they were well out of sight did the marshal turn to Sarah. His eyes, a striking shade of blue that reminded her of summer skies, scanned her for injuries. "Are you hurt, Miss Dawson?" he asked, offering his hand to help her up. Sarah took it, surprised by the warmth of his touch. "No, thanks to you, Marshal Tucker." Her legs felt unsteady as she rose, and she found herself holding his hand a moment longer than necessary. "Call me Owen," he said with a gentle smile that transformed his rugged features. "Everyone does." "I'm Sarah," she replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Though I suppose you already know that." "Small town," he explained with a shrug. "Word travels fast when Mr. Hargrove hires a new assistant from back east, especially one as," he paused, color rising slightly in his cheeks. "Capable as yourself." Before Sarah could respond, the commotion had finally roused the town. Doors opened as curious faces peered out, and within moments they were surrounded by concerned townspeople. "Marshal got them outlaws running," shouted the barber, who had witnessed the standoff from his shop window. "Miss Dawson, are you all right?" Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, rushed forward with a blanket. As Sarah assured everyone of her well-being, she noticed Owen quietly slipping away from the growing crowd. There was something about his demeanor, a solitary quality that intrigued her as much as his bravery had. "Marshal," she called out, causing him to pause and look back. "Thank you. Truly." He tipped his hat with a small smile. "Just doing my job, miss." With that, he continued toward his office, his tall figure cutting a striking silhouette against the rising sun. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she relived the terror of the morning, but also the moment when Owen Tucker had placed himself between her and danger without hesitation. She'd never met a man like him, one whose quiet strength spoke louder than any boastful words ever could. The next morning, Sarah made her way to the marshal's office, carrying a basket of freshly baked bread and preserves. It was a small token of gratitude, but she felt compelled to offer something more personal than the public thanks given amid yesterday's chaos. The office door was open, and she found Owen at his desk, poring over wanted posters. He looked up at her entrance, surprise evident in his expression. "Miss Dawson," he said, standing quickly. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," she assured him. "And please call me Sarah. I brought you these." She placed the basket on his desk. "It's not much compared to what you did, but I wanted to thank you properly." Owen's expression softened. "You didn't need to do that." "I wanted to," she replied simply. "Besides, I doubt the cooking at the hotel is anything to write home about." A genuine laugh escaped him, transforming his serious demeanor. "You've got that right. I've been here 3 years and still haven't developed a taste for Mrs. Higgins's mystery stew." Sarah found herself smiling in return. There was something comforting about his presence, a sense of security she hadn't felt in a long time. "Do you have any leads on those men?" she asked, gesturing to the wanted posters. Owen's expression turned serious again. "I believe they're part of the Reeves gang. They've been hitting payroll shipments across 3 territories. He hesitated before adding, "They're not known for giving up easily." Sarah's stomach tightened at his words. "You think they'll be back?" "I think you should be careful," he replied carefully. "Maybe have someone escort you when you're carrying valuables." His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "I'd be happy to accompany you myself, when duty permits." The offer surprised her, though not unpleasantly. "I wouldn't want to impose on your time." "It wouldn't be an imposition," he said quickly, then seemed to catch himself. "That is, public safety is my primary concern." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the morning sun streaming through the office window. "In that case, I'm making the bank run again next Tuesday. For public safety's sake, perhaps you could join me?" The smile that lit his face made him look younger, less burdened by the weight of the star he carried. "Tuesday it is, then." As Sarah walked back to the mine office, she couldn't help but reflect on the curious flutter in her chest when Owen had smiled at her. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to feel anything beyond the determination to survive. After losing her parents to influenza and being forced to make her own way in the world, romance had seemed an unaffordable luxury. Yet there was something about Owen Tucker that made her wonder if perhaps she'd been too hasty in closing that door. Tuesday came faster than Sarah anticipated. Owen met her outside the mine office promptly at 9, looking different out of his usual dust-covered clothes. He'd clearly made an effort, wearing a clean blue shirt that matched his eyes and a freshly brushed hat. "Good morning, Miss Sarah," he corrected himself with a slight bow. "Good morning, Marshal Owen," she replied with a teasing smile. Their walk to the bank was filled with easy conversation. Sarah learned that Owen had come west after the war, seeking a fresh start like so many others. He'd worked as a ranch hand before being appointed marshal when the previous one retired. "And you?" he asked as they approached the bank. "What brought you all the way from Boston to our little corner of the territory?" Sarah hesitated. Her story wasn't one she shared easily. "After my parents died, there wasn't much left for me back east. I saw Mr. Hargrove's advertisement for an assistant with education and accounting experience." She shrugged. "The salary was good, and I wanted to see something beyond city streets before I grew too old for adventure." Owen's gaze lingered on her face. Brave decision for a young woman alone. "Sometimes bravery is just having no other choice," she replied softly. Their eyes held for a moment longer than propriety dictated, until the bank teller's voice broke the spell. Business was conducted efficiently, and soon they were heading back, Sarah's satchel considerably heavier with the mine's payroll. As they walked, Owen suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his holster. "Sarah," he said quietly, "when I give the word, I want you to run to Doc Miller's office. It's the closest building." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "Don't look now, but we've got company on the rooftop across the street." His voice was calm, belying the tension in his posture. "Looks like the Reeves boys decided to pay us another visit." Before Sarah could respond, a shot rang out, kicking up dust at their feet. Owen pushed her behind him as he drew his revolver. "Run," he ordered, firing back at the assailant. Sarah clutched the satchel and sprinted toward the doctor's office. Another shot cracked the air, followed by the sound of breaking glass. She glanced back to see Owen exchanging fire with at least two men, now one on the roof, and another who had appeared from an alley. She reached the doctor's door just as a third outlaw stepped from behind the water trough, where she'd hidden during their first encounter. His gun pointed directly at her chest. "Hand it over, lady, or die right here," he growled. Sarah froze, her mind racing. The satchel contained not just money, but the livelihoods of families who depended on it. Behind her she could hear Owen still engaged with the other outlaws. Making a split-second decision, she flung the satchel at the outlaw's face with all her might. The unexpected move caught him off guard. And as he fumbled to catch it, Sarah charged forward, ramming her shoulder into his midsection. The outlaw toppled backward, losing his grip on both the satchel and his gun. Sarah scrambled to retrieve both, her fingers closing around the pistol just as the man lunged for her. "Sarah, down!" Owen's voice rang out from behind her. She dropped to the ground as a shot whistled over her head. The outlaw howled in pain, clutching his shoulder as he stumbled backward. Owen appeared beside her, helping her to her feet while keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. "Are you all right?" The concern in his eyes touched her deeply. "Yes," she managed, though her heart was racing so fast she could barely speak. "The other two?" she asked, glancing around warily. "One's down, one's running," Owen replied grimly. "But we need to get inside now." He ushered her into the doctor's office just as more shots rang out from further down the street. "Seems like they brought friends," he muttered, peering out the window. Doc Miller emerged from his back room, alarmed by the gunfire. "What in tarnation is happening?" "Reeves' gang," Owen explained tersely. "They're after the mine payroll. Got a wounded man out front who needs restraining before he bleeds out." While the doctor tended to the injured outlaw under Owen's watchful eye, Sarah sat on a bench, still clutching the satchel. Her hands trembled slightly, but she felt a curious sense of pride alongside the fear. She hadn't frozen or surrendered, she'd fought back. Owen noticed her expression and sat beside her. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen a person do," he said, though there was admiration in his voice. "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted. "I couldn't let them take it. Too many families would go hungry." His gaze softened. "You're something else, Sarah Dawson." The commotion outside grew louder as more townspeople joined the fray. The local blacksmith and several miners had taken up arms to defend their town, forcing the remaining outlaws to retreat. Within the hour, the immediate danger had passed. 2 of the Reeves gang lay dead, 1 was in custody, and the rest had fled, though Owen was certain they wouldn't go far without their prize. "I need to organize a posse," he told Sarah as they left the doctor's office. "We have to track them down before they regroup and try again." Sarah nodded, understanding the necessity but feeling a strange reluctance to see him ride out. "How long will you be gone?" "Hard to say. Few days, maybe more." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'd feel better knowing you're somewhere safe until we return." "I can stay at the hotel," she offered. "My room has a good lock." Owen shook his head. "These men are desperate and determined. I'd prefer—" He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Mrs. Abernathy at the ranch just outside town is an old friend. Her husband's one of the deputies riding with us, but she has 3 ranch hands staying on the property and enough firearms to start a small war." The suggestion made sense, though Sarah couldn't help but feel touched by his concern. "All right, I'll speak to Mr. Hargrove about taking a few days' leave." Relief washed over Owen's features. "Thank you. I'll ride out there with you myself before joining the posse." That evening, Sarah found herself settled into a comfortable room at the Abernathy Ranch. Mrs. Abernathy, a robust woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense attitude and kind eyes, had welcomed her warmly. "Any friend of Owen's is welcome here," she'd said with a knowing look that made Sarah blush despite herself. Now, standing on the porch watching Owen prepare to leave, Sarah felt an unexpected ache in her chest. In the short time she'd known him, he'd become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Be careful out there," she said as he mounted his horse. Owen looked down at her, his expression tender. "I will. You stay safe, too." An impulse seized her, and before she could reconsider, Sarah stepped forward and placed a hand on his leg. "I'll be waiting to hear of your safe return." The intensity in his eyes as they met hers sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "I'll come back, Sarah. That's a promise." With that, he tipped his hat and rode off to join the waiting posse, leaving Sarah with the distinct feeling that something significant had shifted between them. The days at the Abernathy Ranch passed slowly. Sarah helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks to keep busy, but her thoughts constantly drifted to Owen and the posse. On the 3rd evening, as they sat on the porch shelling peas, Mrs. Abernathy broke their comfortable silence. "He's a good man, our Marshal," she said casually. "Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, though." Sarah's hands stilled. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Mrs. Abernathy's laugh was warm and knowing. "Of course you don't, dear. Just as I'm sure you don't spend half your time watching that road for signs of his return." Heat crept into Sarah's cheeks. "We've only just become acquainted." "Sometimes that's all it takes," the older woman replied sagely. "My Harold and I knew within a week of meeting. When it's right, it's right." She paused her work to look directly at Sarah. "Owen's been alone too long. Lost his wife and baby daughter to fever back in '69. Hasn't let anyone close since." The revelation struck Sarah deeply. She'd sensed a sadness in him but hadn't known its source. "That's terrible," she whispered. "It was," Mrs. Abernathy nodded. "Nearly destroyed him. But that look in his eyes when he brought you here, that's something I haven't seen in a very long time. Hope." Before Sarah could formulate a response, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Her heart leaped to her throat as she recognized Owen's tall figure leading the returning posse. She stood, unconsciously smoothing her dress as the riders approached the ranch house. Owen dismounted, looking exhausted but whole, his face lighting up when he spotted her on the porch. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious," he assured her, though she noticed he favored his left side slightly. "We got them, Sarah, all of them. The Reeves gang won't be troubling this territory again." Mrs. Abernathy tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone on the porch as the rest of the posse continued into town. "You're injured," Sarah said, noticing a dark stain on his shirt as he climbed the steps. "Just a graze," he insisted, though he winced when she lightly touched his side. "Let me see," she demanded, her tone brooking no argument. To her surprise, he complied, unbuttoning his shirt enough to reveal a bloody bandage wrapped around his ribs. "One of them got lucky during the final standoff. Doc patched me up before we rode back." Sarah's fingers hovered near the wound, her concern evident. "You should be resting, not riding all this way." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I made a promise to come back to you. I aim to keep my promises." The simple statement and the look in his eyes as he said it made Sarah's heart race. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw where several days' worth of stubble had grown. "I'm glad you did," she whispered. Owen caught her hand in his, holding it against his cheek. "Sarah," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I know we haven't known each other long, but these past days, not knowing if I'd see you again." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "It made me realize I don't want to waste any more time being alone." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Mrs. Abernathy told me about your wife and daughter. I'm so sorry, Owen." Pain flickered across his features, but he didn't look away. "For years I've been existing, not living. Then you came to town, and suddenly," he squeezed her hand gently, "suddenly I remembered what it feels like to care whether tomorrow comes or not." The rawness of his confession touched something deep within Sarah. Her own losses had taught her the fragility of life, the importance of seizing happiness when it appeared. "I feel the same way," she admitted softly. "When those outlaws first attacked, all I could think about was surviving. But when you rode out with the posse, I realized I was afraid of losing something I hadn't even acknowledged having yet." Owen's free hand came up to cup her face. "And what's that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "A future," she replied simply. "One that includes you." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips. Then it deepened, carrying the weight of their shared understanding that life was too precious and too uncertain to deny what they both clearly felt. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably court you properly before kissing you senseless on a porch," he said with a rueful smile. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I believe saving my life twice earns you certain liberties, Marshal Tucker." His expression grew serious again. "I want to do this right, Sarah. You deserve that." "What I deserve is happiness," she countered, "and somehow, against all odds in this dusty little town, I've found it with you." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. True to his word, Owen courted her properly, Sunday dinners after church, walks along the creek that gave the town its name, and quiet evenings on the porch of the small house he'd built on the edge of town. The town observed their courtship with approving eyes. Sarah continued her work at the mine office, though Mr. Hargrove had promoted her to full accountant after her bravery during the payroll incident became known. Owen maintained law and order with the same quiet authority, though townspeople noted he smiled more these days. 3 months after the showdown with the Reeves gang, Owen took Sarah riding to a beautiful spot overlooking the valley. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, he turned to her with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I brought you here for a reason," he said, taking both her hands in his. "This is where I decided to build my home when I first came to Copper Creek. The view reminded me that there's beauty in this world, even when it's hard to see from down in the valley." Sarah squeezed his hands encouragingly. "It's breathtaking." "Not as breathtaking as you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, when those outlaws had you at gunpoint, I didn't think twice about putting myself between you and danger, not because it was my duty as Marshal, but because the thought of a world without you in it was unbearable, even then." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small ring. The simple gold band held a modest sapphire that caught the dying sunlight. "I love you, Sarah Dawson. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Owen Tucker, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added, "On one condition." He raised an eyebrow, waiting. "That you promise never to stand between me and danger again without wearing a proper bulletproof vest," she said, only half joking as she touched the spot where his wound had healed. Owen laughed, pulling her into his arms. "I promise to try, though I can't guarantee my instincts where you're concerned." "I suppose I'll have to accept that," she sighed dramatically before her expression turned serious. "I love you, Owen, more than I thought possible." "And I love you," he replied, sealing the promise with a kiss as the last rays of sun gilded the valley below. They were married that autumn in Copper Creek's small church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, delighted to see their respected Marshal find happiness with the brave Eastern woman who'd faced down outlaws for their sake. Sarah wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her make, and Owen cut a handsome figure in a new suit ordered specially from Tucson. As they spoke their vows, both felt the presence of those they'd lost: parents, spouse, child, but also the blessing of having found each other against all odds. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also immeasurable joy. Owen continued as Marshal until the railroad came through in 1883, bringing growth that necessitated a larger force. He then took over as sheriff of the expanded county, a position that allowed him more time at home. Sarah eventually became the full manager of the Silver Sage mine when Mr. Hargrove retired, her financial acumen having saved the operation during the difficult economic times of the late 1870s. Her progressive employment practices, including fair wages for the Mexican and Chinese workers many operations exploited, made the mine a model for others in the territory. In the spring of 1878, their family grew with the birth of twin daughters, whom they named Mary and Elizabeth. 3 years later, they welcomed a son, James. Their home, expanded from Owen's original small house, became known for its warmth and hospitality. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Owen and Sarah would sit on their porch overlooking the valley and marvel at how a moment of terrible danger had led to such profound happiness. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked once, as they watched a summer storm roll across the distant mountains. "When the Reeves gang held me at gunpoint?" Owen's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Sometimes. Mostly I remember the look in your eyes afterward, like you'd seen something in me worth knowing." "I had," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "I'd seen the man I would love for the rest of my life. Even though we'd barely spoken before that day?" Sarah smiled, thinking of Mrs. Abernathy's words from years ago. "When it's right, it's right. Sometimes that's all it takes." As the first raindrops began to fall, they gathered their children's toys and moved inside, hand in hand, forever grateful for the courage that had brought them together and the love that had made them whole.